Hello, I'm Laure Rosauer, and I am here today with Bill McCormick. Bill McCormick is a candidate running for supervisor on the town board, and we are going to spend a bit of time visiting and talking about his interest in being in this position and his position on certain issues facing our town. So with that said, I'd like to introduce to you Bill McCormick. And Bill, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what is driving you to want to serve as a supervisor on the town board?
Sure, Laura, I can do that. Thank you. Thank you to the citizens of the town of Waterford for this opportunity to talk to you. I'm Bill McCormick. I'm married to Julie McCormick. We moved into the area in 2018. We started to build our home here, and it's become the dream home for us. We love the town of Waterford and the Waterford area. We came from Mugwanago, and then I grew up in Elm Grove, so I've pretty much been a lifelong resident of the state of Wisconsin. Love the state and love the area, as I said. So I've gotten involved in the area. I currently sit on the board for something called the WWMD, that's Waterford Waterway Management District, for Lake Tishigan and the Fox River. And I'm the APM chairman, that stands for Aquatic Plant Management. And so basically, in a nutshell, I manage the weed harvesting operations and the weed treatment operations on the waterway. I'm appointed currently by the town of Waterford for the seat that I hold on the WWMD. That appointment started approximately 5 years ago. One of the things I'm required to do for that appointment is to report back every month and attend the monthly board meetings from the town. So I've been attending monthly board meetings for the most part over the last 5 years. I've seen now 3 administrations come through. And I can tell you that it's not been without some frustration. And I look at the town boards that we've had in the past and those currently, and I see a need for more leadership. I see a need for more assistance and perhaps even more experience to help this town grow and help this town get through some of the challenges that it's had, both in the past and perhaps those that it's facing in the future. So I have a lot of skill set that I can bring to the table, and I'm happy to talk to that in more detail. And that is really why I'm running. I see a need for a town that I really love, to be able to foster and grow as we move forward, and to not flounder, to not get involved in some of the pettiness that has been going on in the past years, to not really be viewed as a good old boys club, but to really be viewed more as an organization and administration that wants to grow this town and move the town forward and wants to advance it in the right directions. So I think I can do that, and that's why I'm running.
Well, thank you. So you highlighted on your experience right now participating with the WWMD, but are there other areas that you think you bring to the table, other areas of expertise and experience that would help you in this position as a supervisor with the town board?
Certainly, yes. So I've had some civic volunteer things that I've done in my past. When I was in college at the University of Oshkosh, I was on the student council, getting involved with government affairs or local university affairs. I was a representative for the students to the faculty in my area of study. Also, once I got out of college, I was involved in New Berlin with their Chamber of Commerce. I was on the board for their Chamber of Commerce in my 20s. Also, at that time, I volunteered with the New Berlin Lions Club and spent some time there, really improving the community there and so forth, and all the good things that the Lions Clubs do. From a professional standpoint, I've made a career of working in management and leadership with various corporations. I've worked for multi-billion-dollar corporations. Today, I presently work for a company that's an ESOP company in New Berlin. It's an 84-year-old company, and I lead the sales for that company, and we're approximately 40 million in sales. I've traveled during my business dealings to 46 different countries. I've dealt with governments and local municipalities. I've dealt with the Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Defense. I've dealt with things in Washington, D.C. I've been on councils in Washington, D.C. for manufacturing councils and things to advise the federal government on how to expand and do things in this country. So I've got a lot of exposure. I've managed a lot of teams. I've mentored a lot of people in my career. The most I've mentored is 17 people I was managing at one company. So just a lot of experience. My wife and I have a small business. She's very successful at it. We've been married, by the way, for 35 years. I love my wife.
Congratulations.
I've got two kids and some new grandchildren too. So that's a new phase of our life that we're getting into and absolutely love it. So no, it really stems back to, this is an awesome community. I've made a lot of friends in I think a short period of time. As I said, we started to build this house in 2018 and moved in shortly after 2019. And have just met so many wonderful people and just feel that the community deserves better. And I think it needs some better leadership. And I think the current leadership needs some professional support and some experience. I should add, in my background, in my career, I've worked with very large multi-million-dollar construction projects. I've worked on big contracts with governments, municipalities, large entities. I've done a lot of capital equipment procurement over the years. I've sold a lot of capital equipment, so I understand that aspect as well. So I think I touch upon a lot of areas that the town does get involved in from time to time that I could be of help. And at a minimum, you'll find with my leadership and my style, I ask a lot of questions. I want to make sure I understand things, and I also want to make sure that we have full open discussion and transparency so that those stakeholders that are involved, which of course are the taxpayers, would have an understanding of the direction that we're going in with the town and the decisions that the town is making going forward.
Excellent, thank you. So what specific issues do you feel that the town needs to address? And what, if any, solutions would you recommend to address those issues?
Yeah, great question. You know, I think we still have the issue of the police department. I can, without any hesitation, tell you that I am in full support of the town having its own police department. And I don't know what the right size of the department is, and I think that's something we need to explore further as a board. And I think we need to work with the new police chief to understand if our community has a right-sized police department. What does that look like? What do we need to be doing into the future? Do we need to be investing in things like body cams, and are there other resources or tools that the police department needs in order for it to function efficiently and effectively and provide a safe environment for our residents? So it's a very important thing for me. In fact, the sign that I support the town police department is still in my front yard, and it will continue to stay there until I know that we have now organized and structured the police department the way it needs to be in order to be successful going forward. You know, so that's one issue, and I don't think it's an issue that has been totally cleared up yet and addressed. And I know they're working on it, and I'd like to really get understanding of how they're working on it and how can we move that forward and better it. I think there's all other issues too. I'm very concerned about the ability for our town to sustain itself financially. I'm concerned about some of the levies and the budgets and the tax assessments that are going to be coming and so forth. You know, it looks to me, since I've been here, we've not really had any growth. You know, aside from maybe another storage facility coming in, we've not really had any sustainable growth, you know, with new developments, whether it be in businesses coming in or it be with the advancement of new subdivisions and things of that nature. And I don't see a plan. You know, I don't think we have a plan for growth. And I think that's going to be very important as we move forward. That's something I'd like to push for, is a a strategic, sustainable growth plan for the town that makes sense. And we have to look at all stakeholders. We have to look at the farmers that are in this community. We need to look at the residents that are in these communities and some of the small business owners and things. And we really need to come together and put together, I think, a plan that makes sense so that we can obtain some growth. And that growth will then allow us to grow our budgets and sustain our budgets and pay for it without putting a huge strain on the tax base.
Excellent. Do you personally believe that the town has an adequate operating budget? And if not, what would you recommend to modify it?
Well, I'm concerned about the town's budget. I know they have a budget. I believe it's a balanced budget. But what has me concerned is if we're not growing and if we cannot raise our budget because we can't raise our levies because we haven't had any growth added to the town. If we don't have that, then what do? You end up cutting back on your budget. You have to make your budget fit the revenue that you have coming in. And if the state won't allow you to increase that revenue, or you're not increasing it by creating growth, then you're going to have to look at reducing your budget because what happens? We have everything going up. The cost of trucks go up. The cost of labor goes up for DPW and our police officers and our fire services. So all those things, administration costs go up. Everything goes up. We're all paying more. We're all paying more right now today for our own households and to exist. And it's like this. I couldn't afford to sustain the house I live in, my wife and I, if my salary didn't go up over the next 10 to 15 years. If it just stayed constant. And I think we've been running a town that stayed constant. And we've not been having any increased revenue activity. Why? Because we have no growth. So that's not sustainable, and that's not good for our budget. If we're cutting back, it means we're likely cutting back on road repairs or resurfacing and redoing roads and things of that nature. We might be cutting back on some of our services from the fire and police that we currently have today, or the DPW. So do we really need to cut back on those things? Maybe. Those are things that have to be looked at in the budget. But I would like to see us where we have growth, sustainable growth, and that we can afford to have some increases to our budget to really do some more things for our citizens.
Okay. And so I'm assuming then your perspective on how to increase the budget is through a defined growth plan that you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We have to have a defined growth plan, I believe, going forward, and we need help with that to establish that.
Excellent. So in 2023, the town and village came together to develop a cooperative boundary agreement, which is in effect a way for the two municipalities to work alongside of each other, resolve conflicts, and plan for future growth in a cooperative manner. And it's my understanding that committee of town representatives and village representatives worked together tirelessly for 2 years on an agreement. And it came to a vote in 2025. I think I've been told that the village passed it, but the town did not. What's your stance on the cooperative boundary agreement? Do you think it's something that we need to address, or is it something that we should continue to let sit unattended?
So it's interesting, the town boundary agreement, or the boundary agreement as it's stated between the town and village, is something I'm investigating into further. Do I know 100% everything about that agreement and how it's all laid out? At this point in time, no. Have I recently obtained documents and information about that? Yes, I just got that this weekend. So I'll be diving into that further. But on its face, as I understand it, I believe it's a very important agreement that we need to have between the village and the town. And again, a big part of that agreement, as I understand it and how it's structured, would allow the town to have more growth. Because it's my understanding right now, there's an ordinance from the village that indicates that within 1.5 miles of the village boundaries, which goes out into the town boundaries, the town cannot have any development occur on properties that are subdivided less than 20 acres. So if there's a piece of farmland, a farmer's looking to retire and sell their land to a developer to develop a subdivision, that developer is limited to 20-acre lots. Well, that's not the kind of development that makes sense for the community going forward. And it doesn't make sense to a developer to invest in that. So it's restricting our abilities to do some growth and so forth. So the other thing it does is, my understanding is these boundary agreements are very common. They're done throughout Wisconsin, and they're done really so that municipalities and entities that are next to each other and have boundaries can really define how they're going to work together as they both look towards the growth of their communities. And that makes perfect sense to me. I think it's, in the past, this town has had a position with some of the prior administrations that we're the town, we don't want the village, or maybe vice versa, we're the village and we don't want the town. That makes no sense to me. I love this community, and I look at the community as Waterford. I don't look at the community necessarily as the town of Waterford and the village of Waterford, and we should butt heads and lock horns and be against each other. That makes no sense to me. I mean, I think there's opportunities for us to perhaps look at a cost savings, if it makes sense, to share resources between the two municipalities. And I'd be open to those things, to explore those things. If they make sense for the tax base within the town of Waterford, then I think we ought to be exploring that from a board standpoint for the town.
So you're hitting on the next topic I wanted to address with you, and that is our relationship with the village. How do you perceive it at this point, and do you see there's an opportunity for us to improve working with the village?
I get a sense for our new town chairman, Tim Selinsky, and Adam Jeske, the president of the village. I get a sense that those two are trying to bridge some gaps that were there before, some very large gaps. My sense is that they're trying to come together and at least have some dialogue over things. I don't particularly know what they're talking about, but I'm told that it's a relationship that's starting that maybe wasn't quite there in the past, or wasn't, a very good relationship in the past with some of the previous leaders from both sides. So that's encouraging. I like to hear that. It only makes sense. I mean, we are neighbors, and why wouldn't you want to know your neighbor, and why wouldn't you want to try and communicate with your neighbor and get to know them better and see if there's some things that make sense from a shared resource perspective. Because at the end of the day, when you break it down, we're 6,500 people here in the town. I don't know what the population is in the village. I would assume it's much less than that. So we're not a large community. And yet we have all the constraints and all the costs that are coming at us because of things going up all around us. And we need to do a better job of figuring out how to deal with that. And maybe there's some collaboration there that makes sense between the town and the village.
Okay. So I'm going to move on now to a couple of different areas. We currently, you just, discussed the fact that we're operating as two separate entities. We have two separate fire EMS organizations. So what are your thoughts on the current town fire and EMS?
Well, I was at one of the recent board meetings, I think the board meeting in December, where a number of residents were questioning the operating budget for the contractor that we currently use in Michigan Fire, for our fire and ambulance services. And it's my understanding that I believe we are the only municipality that contracts with that private contractor. So I would assume that we are a large share of their budget. And I've also believed that over the years, I've been part of these board meetings where it looks like the board has made decisions to make some investments and help the Michigan Fire Department with some purchases of equipment and things of that nature. So if we're doing that and we have a close relationship with them, I think it's important that we understand the costs that are associated with that operation. And I would like to see a little bit more transparency in that area so that the board can make better decisions as to how it works with its current relationship with the Tischken, fire department. The other thing is, if the village has its own fire department, again, is there potential for some type of collaboration between the two fire departments to work more closely together to minimize and some of the and offset some of the costs that would be needed to upgrade equipment or purchase new equipment and things of that nature. The other thing that is definitely clearly happening, not just in the fire department world or the police department world, it's happening in industry and corporations and services all over, and that is the rising costs of labor. And, one of the discussions from the December meeting was, a big part of why Tischken Fire had to increase their budget and their contract with us and their ask for more money is because they're having a hard time attracting people to become firemen and women. So they can't attract them. They need to raise the labor rates. So if we have to have this constant labor rate, and if you've got a situation, I've heard this, where a lot of these younger people don't want to get into the fire services. They don't want to become a fireman. They don't want to become a policeman. So we're going to have to increase the labor to make that attractive, the wages to make that attractive for them, to attract good talent. So that's a cost that I only see going up. So I think it's very important that perhaps the two communities look for some more collaboration there and figure out how can we best deal with this.
Yeah, we didn't touch base on this earlier, but it's my understanding that I believe that the two communities are joint in their efforts in working with our local police department. So the Waterford Police Department would be serving the village as well. So it's not just it's not the town's police department, it'll be for both. So you're saying that there may be a possibility to explore similarities within the fire and EMS?
Yeah, I think so. That might be a possibility. It's something I'd like to at least explore as a board member. Now, my understanding of the relationship, perhaps even currently, between the town and the village regarding police services, it appears to me it's always been the town submitting an invoice to the village saying we had 2 officers in the village for X amount of hours on these days or this month. Here's your bill. I don't know if that's collaboration or not. I'd like to see a little bit more investment from both municipalities and more collaboration, not just one receiving a bill from the other. I think we need to look at that arrangement and see if it can't structure it where it's a joint. We're jointly invested in this, not just one receiving a bill from the other.
Okay, that's a good point. So I'm going to move on now to another area. So we've talked about the operating budget, and part of what drives the operating budget is the property tax assessments that use to fund the town's budget. So it's my understanding that we have not had a town-wide assessment on properties since 2008. And I believe this coming week that will be being addressed at the town board. In doing some review on this, I think it's recommended by the Department of Revenue that towns look into this every 5 years to make sure that you don't fall behind, because there is a requirement that you have to be in 100% compliance with the market value set by the state. So my question for you is, what's your position or thoughts about the current circumstances around property tax assessments, and where would you like to see it in the future?
Yeah, great question. This is an area that I don't know much about, but I've heard, that this is coming, that we have to have this town-wide assessment. I've been trying to dive in and learn more about the topic. I can tell you from my own perspective, I've been surprised that for the most part my taxes have not gone up since we built the house initially. I know that property values all around us have gone up substantially. So I personally know that my wife and I will have to pay the piper at some point there will be a change to our property taxes. But you know, if the Wisconsin Department of Revenue wants you to, municipality, to have these assessments done every 5 years, and we haven't done one since 2008, that's a problem, and I think that's doing our citizens an injustice. In other words, if there are people out there that haven't really had substantial increases other than the school referendums and things on their tax bills, they could be in for a really rude awakening. And I would think it would be much easier to have more regular assessments done so that as citizens we get more accustomed to our taxes going up slightly than from going from here to way up here. And that's hard for anybody to swallow. So when you work as a family with your own budget, it's a lot easier to kind of have incremental increases that you're budgeting for rather than drastic increases. So I think we owe it to our citizens to do a better job of doing the assessments that we need to be doing per state regulations and things.
Very good point. Another topic I would like to address is we have some concerns in the community about the lack of public comment and public input in the town board meetings and really in working with the town board. And so some people are concerned about it, others may not be. And I was wondering, what's your position on that?
My position is that I want to hear from our constituents. I want to hear from the tax base. I don't have all the answers. I'll never claim I have all the answers. I like to get other people's perspectives. And I think under a sustainable system or a set of rules, Robert's rules and things for the meeting, so that the meeting doesn't get taken over by the public. But I think the public needs to have a voice in these meetings. I really do. I think it's important for the board members to hear from the public, hear their viewpoints, give them an opportunity to ask questions. I'd like to see more transparency. I'd like to see a better form of transparency from the board. You know, I go to these board meetings and you can tell that there's a packet of information that the board of directors, the supervisors have had. I assume they've reviewed it, and then all of a sudden, bam, 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 they're going through these issues. You really don't understand fully what the issue is, but yet they're voting on it and they're moving forward. So I think it's important to lay out a little more background on some of the major issues so the public has a voice and has an opportunity to weigh in on those issues, and that can help the board make better decisions, in my opinion. So I'm in favor of controlled, structured open meetings with getting input from the town residents at the board meetings. I think it's necessary and needed. I also would add that I think Chairman Selinsky is doing a great job with these committees because it's very difficult. As a volunteer for the WWND, I know how hard it is as a volunteer to try and get some major things done. And a lot of times you're spending a lot of time trying to get something going. So he's created these committees. I'd like to hear more of the committee reports. I'd like to see the committee's report or the responsible board member over that committee to give a report during the town board meeting so that we understand how these committees are progressing, what are the issues that are dealing with and addressing, and are they getting any input from the public as well.
Very good. So in looking at this, you've given us a good array of insights in terms of what it is that you see you want the town to kind of be doing and what you bring to the table. But are there any additional areas that are of concern to you, or maybe not even necessarily of concern but of interest, that you want to touch on that I haven't popped up as a potential issue within the town?
Yeah, I think so. So along the lines of creating a structured growth plan for the town, I think to execute that plan or even create that plan, we need to look at a town administrator, somebody that is experienced, that they have the education behind them so that they can help structure and build a growth plan for a community. I see that the village has their town administrator position coming open at the end of February. So perhaps that's an opportunity for us with some collaboration. Maybe we look at a joint sharing of an administrator for both municipalities that can help us look at our area as a whole, and how do we attract new businesses, how do we attract new structured common sense residential development in the community. I don't think the answer is going in and allowing 1,500 apartments to go in, where maybe it's a few buildings and we get a little bit of tax revenue off of that, but then it becomes a huge burden to our tax base on schools and things like that. That doesn't make sense to me. But an administrator, somebody that's experienced in really laying out plans for towns and villages, I think that would be a benefit for us. The other thing I'd like to point out is we have a tremendous resource here in our community. When you think about it, our name is Waterford. What's the major part of our name? Water. What do we have? We have the Fox River, we have Lake Michigan. What a great resource. And just as Lake Geneva has a great resource there, and they're building around that resource, and people want to be in that community, in that area, their property tax values are going up because they've got a great resource. We can have that too with this resource that we have in our community. And I think it's important for us to look at this resource and make sure it's being properly maintained, and that we're promoting it and so forth to bring in others to our community, for new development and new growth. I think we also need to look at Case New Holland. They've now taken over the Rosauer building. That's a big multi-billion-dollar global company, that has, I'm sure, really good jobs, high-paying jobs. So how do we support and how do we bring in strategically more types of companies like that to our community? We see the developments going on in Kenosha and North Prairie with the Microsoft coming in. Mm-hmm. And Microsoft has been looking for other areas near there to develop. Does that make sense for us to look at? Those jobs certainly would be high-paying jobs, and could, perhaps if we can attract them here, we can grow the community in a right way.
Awesome. Well, Bill, it's been a pleasure talking with you today, and I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us and to share your vision and introduce yourself to our community. I think we are very fortunate to have you running as a candidate for supervisor on the town board. So thank you again for your time.
Yeah, Laure, I'd like to thank you and Tanya for your time today as well. Thank you for this opportunity for me to share my views with the citizens of town of Waterford. I want to just reach out to the town citizens. If you have a question for me, please reach out to me personally. I'm happy to talk to anybody. I'd like to hear your points of view and your thoughts. So that's my candidacy. I'm running as an open candidate, open to ideas and thoughts from others, and really want to help forward the community, move the community forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.